Hello and welcome to Press TV News Analysis. I'm Kaveh Taghwayi. The Iran IAEA meeting wrapped up on Thursday here in the capital, Tehran. What was supposed to be a one-day meeting, which was extended into 2 days. No agreement was finalized except for an arrangement to meet in Tehran on February the 12th. Yet Western media had reported the meetings as being a failure, rejected by Iran's envoy to the IAEA, Mr. Soltanieh. In this news analysis, we'll be discussing Iran's nuclear file and whether there are sincere efforts by the IAEA to resolve this issue.
In which we have Iran's envoy to the International Atomic Energy Agency says there has been a sustained progress in recent talks with a high-ranking delegation from the agency in Tehran. Speaking to Press TV, Aliasghar Soltanieh said the IAEA representatives hadn't come to the Iranian capital to seek access to any military site. He also said the two sides agreed to hold another round of talks on February 12th. Altogether, there were 8 members of the delegation. We had, in a very constructive, friendly environment, talks intensively about all aspects of this matter. And I have to say that we have gone forward. Of course, we were not in position to finalize or sign this text, but it was decided to have another meeting. In fact, we proposed that they could stay one more day, but because 2 of the members of the delegation had other obligations, therefore they suggested to have another meeting, in fact next meeting, 12th of February. Iran's ambassador to the IAEA rejected claims by certain Western media outlets that the negotiators were looking for a breakthrough in the 2-day meeting. He acknowledged that differences still remain on a number of outstanding issues. And I reject this, let's say, assessment, which is responsible, in fact, assertion, because, as I said, we had 2 days of intensive talks, and we were able to, in fact, bridge the gap to some extent, but whether we were able to finally sign it, no. Which is very natural, because we will do it only when both sides come to the conclusion that major concerns are incorporated. Iran and the IAEA seek to finalize a structured framework that could outline the cooperation between the two sides. The agency wants to revisit Parchin, a military site southeast of the capital, Tehran, to probe Western and Israeli allegations that the site is linked to Iran's nuclear energy program. Tehran denies the allegations, although in the past it allowed the agency to inspect Parchin twice.
Iran says it gives access to Parchin once a structured framework for cooperation is finalized and signed by the two sides. But the IAEA, under pressure from the West, does not want anything to be finalized at this point in time, and they want to prolong the issue for an unspecified period of time.
Tehran says any new agency inspection must be governed by an agreement that lays out the scope of such an inspection. Tehran says it is always ready to allay any concern the IAEA might have regarding its nuclear energy program. Tehran has also made it absolutely clear that any agreement with the agency has to recognize its right to peaceful nuclear activities. Aman Naderi, Press TV, Tehran.
Let's open this up. Let me introduce our guest. Professor at the University of Tehran, Mohammad Marandi, joins us here in the capital, Tehran, in the studios. We have from Newsmax magazine, Stuart Stogel, who joins us from New York. We have the professor at the University of California, Nader Barghazadeh, joining us via Skype from Irvine, California. Gentlemen, welcome. Professor Marandi, let me start with you. In what Iran's envoy, Dr. Aliasghar Soltanieh, said there in that report, and I'm going to quote him, "We had 2 days of intensive talks. We were able to bridge the gaps to some extent, but whether we were able to finally sign it, no." Give us your feedback on that, and why then would the media describe these talks as a failure?
Well, the Western media obviously describes it as a failure because what they want, in line with what their governments want, is capitulation on the behalf of the Iranians. The Iranians, their position, I think, is quite clear. From the very start, the Iranians have said that they have no problem at all with the IAEA inspecting Parchin. And as was stated earlier, Parchin has already been inspected twice in the past, and there was nothing at all discovered there that was in any way or form suspicious. The problem that the Iranians have right now is that they say that unless there is a structured framework where it is clear what Iran gets in response to cooperation. If Iran, for example, allows inspectors into Parchin, what does Iran get in return? If the IAEA simply wants to inspect Parchin, find nothing, and then 2 months later say they want to inspect somewhere else, and then continue with this can go on for years, if not decades, and nothing will be resolved. The Iranians are saying that in response to our cooperation, there has to be a comprehensive solution. And for every step that we take, there has to be a step taken on behalf of the IAEA and by extension, of course, the 5+1. So if the IAEA inspects a place and says nothing was there, then they have to admit that the questions that existed have been answered, and sanctions, for example, by the 5+1 have to be decreased and eventually removed altogether. And the IAEA, after every step, has to say that yes, this question has been resolved. And after a series of meetings and inspections, then the whole issue has to be resolved. So the Iranians are saying that inspections are fine, but there has to be an end game.
We're going to talk about this give and take that's obviously involved in this one aspect of this whole thing. But Nader Bagherzadeh, what I found interesting was Dr. Soltanieh when he said in a statement to sign it, in which he has also said we have been talking not on 100 pages but 2 or 3 pages, and sometimes on one notion he said that they talked about that extensively. So modality agreement is in the works, and therefore both sides are very close to it being signed off. So that in itself is quite an achievement, isn't it?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think Professor Marandi summarized it very well. I think they're coming down to a few words here and there. And in my opinion, they are very, very close. I think one of the key areas is, I think as Professor Marandi said, is that once you visit Parchin, what is the end game? And I think they can reach a conclusion on that. Perhaps they give a window of a few weeks or months. They are so close that it would be really a shame not to come to the signing an agreement like the work plan that they had with Al-Baradei and Dr. Larijani. I think they did that. So I'm hoping that they can work out those 3 extra words that Dr. Soltanieh said. Another important issue regarding these 2 meetings was there were 8 visitors from IAEA, so there are a lot of technical stuff. Dr. Soltanieh said, I don't want to bore people with the technical stuff. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that they're reaching a point where those extra issues left will be resolved very quickly to get to the point of perhaps, if it's allowed, to visit Parchin, do a check mark, maybe if they want to go back again for a very short period of time, but not open-ended. I think open-ended will not work. And I think as such, Dr. Soltanieh has said in numerous reports and interviews that that's not acceptable. So they should find a way in between, and let's hope they will do that, because I think the environment, the atmosphere for negotiation with the agency and the Western world could not be better at this time, in my opinion.
Stuart Sogol, based on some Iranian diplomats, they're thinking that the agency does not want the case to be closed and wants to raise other issues once the existing questions are fully answered by Iran. We just had Professor Marandi talk about, for example, Parchin, whether they want to visit the site one day and then perhaps after that's visited, go to another site within Parchin and maybe come back to the site. Is this a kind of an endless process? And in this case in point, that's being pushed by the agency?
Well, there's been a report, at least that I've seen within the last few hours. There are allegations that Iran has been testing mock-ups of nuclear triggers. That may be a new issue and a new wrinkle that's going to be interjected into these meetings. If that issue, meaning the possibility of testing nuclear triggers, is not resolved, I think we're going to get worse rather than get, situation's not going to get any better. It'll get substantially worse. And most likely that issue of Iran perhaps testing nuclear triggers will be a major cornerstone of John Kerry's Senate confirmation hearings to be the next Secretary of State. The nuclear trigger issue could throw everything back to square one.
Professor Marandi, we've heard this one before, just like we've heard the laptop issue. Perhaps you can expand more on this, how when we come close to something being resolved, coming into fruition, then something else is put and stops the process.
Yes, I think it's quite clear. This has been going on for a decade now. Whenever the United States feels, or its allies feel, that things are not going well, new allegations are put forward. None of these allegations are linked to any real evidence. They're basically information, so-called information, leaked to the media by Western agencies and Western governments, sometimes the Israelis, but we've never seen any real evidence. If the IAEA had evidence, real and concrete evidence itself, that Iran was doing anything illegal, it would announce this, it would be declared, and it would be clear to all that, that something is wrong. But the problem is that just as in this case, as in all previous occasions, it's basically linked to vague sources, Western intelligence agencies, and at the end of the day, there's really nothing behind it. It's basically propaganda and a means to put pressure on Iran. At the end of the day, though, I think this is something that Western countries have to recognize. The Iranians are not going to capitulate. The Iranians are not going to give them a free hand in Iran without getting something in return. A comprehensive solution is there. The Iranians have been willing to allow Western countries to inspect Parchin a long time ago, but the problem is that Western countries are putting pressure on the IAEA. If you look at the WikiLeaks documents, we all know that Mr. Amino, he is very much in the Western camp. That is how he got elected in the first place. He told the Americans that on every key issue, he will be on their side. And really, if one looks at American documents published by the American government and key think tanks, the real issue is not so much the Iranian nuclear program. It's so-called containing Iran that's important, and the nuclear program is being used as an excuse. Right now, when you look at the sanctions that are being imposed upon Iran, they've imposed them on the central bank. The intention is to hurt ordinary Iranians. And this is something that also exists in the WikiLeaks documents. The previous sanctions were directed against ordinary Iranians, preventing Iran from importing and exporting and even importing medicine, which is, in the eyes of many Iranians, a crime against humanity. And one final point is the fact that while the Iranians have for 2 years, they halted the enrichment of uranium and implemented the additional protocol, they got absolutely nothing in return. So this time around, the Iranians are saying, we are not going to give up enrichment because we are an independent country and we have the right to enrich. We haven't broken international law. If you agree with a comprehensive solution, we will take steps, and in response, you have to take steps as well. The West cannot have their cake and eat it as well.
Very well. Professor Marandi has talked about this give and take, Nader Bagherzadeh. Let's break that open with, well, let's bring in a statement made by Patrick Clausen. He's the Deputy Director for Research at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He also directs the Iran Security Initiative. His article read, Obama, offer Iran a generous deal, in which he said the U.S. should use a generous offer to see if Iran is willing to prop open the window or see it fall shut. Shouldn't the U.S. be doing this? And of course, the other countries that are part of the P5+1.
So usually I disagree whatever Mr. Clausen says, so I'm not going to dwell on the details of what he said. But I think looking a little higher level, the team that is being reviewed to be approved for the cabinet will provide, in my opinion, the best team in the White House in the past 10, 15, 20 years to deal with the Iran nuclear issue. The combination of Senators Kerry and hopefully Hagel and Mr. Obama with his position. So I think the door will be open again by this White House probably very soon. once this team is in place, if they get approved. And I think there has to be a bilateral interactions between Iran and the United States. And to some extent, perhaps it's time to have some token of representative token from even Iran, perhaps to say that, look, this team is somebody we can work with, some people that we can work with. We look forward to having that opening again in a meaningful way, where some level of enrichment is definitely in the agreement. Many times, I think Iranian leadership has said that 20% enrichment is not something that we really want to continue forever. Perhaps there could be some unilateral decisions on that if the decision makers find it appropriate. But this is the right time. I assure you this as an observer. If anything can be done, it has to be done this year with this current team. Hopefully gets approved and get validated to come to the cabinet. And there has to be a lot of opening in terms of negotiation. And I think it's critical that the two sides will go to the next step. But there will not be another opportunity as good as it is for a while, in my opinion, to say, I mean, as an observer.
Stuart Sogol, I think you disagree with him, but you tell us, is this the time?
Are you asking me?
No, Stuart Sogol, go ahead.
Audio went down in New York.
Go ahead, Stuart Sogol.
Yeah, can you repeat the question? I wasn't able to hear you.
Nader Baghazadeh said that this is an opportune time, the right time.
Well, you can say any time is really the right time. We've seen right times pass now for the last year and a half, and in essence, we've remained at square one. I think the United States is, if they do not get their way, unfortunately, I think the United States is prepared to put pressure on the Security Council to hold firm and increase the economic pressure on Tehran until Tehran gives what the United States considers to be substantive movement. Remember one thing, we're in a presidential election year in Iran, and the Americans will do anything and everything to make sure that the new Iranian president is more malleable, so to speak, than the current one. So I don't expect the pressure to ease up unless Tehran gives in to American demands. It's unfortunate, but that's the way I see it.
Professor Marandi, is this a showdown between, not showdown, but is this about the U.S. and Iran only?
Well, I think it's a continuation of American ambitions for hegemony over the region and especially Iran. And unfortunately for the United States, it's not going to happen. The United States has imposed as many sanctions that it could possibly impose upon the Iranian people. It is seen as by Iranians as being quite barbaric to try to prevent Iranians from importing even medicine by blocking the Iranian central bank. But I think the United States is, and its allies not only are they moving deeper into economic uncertainty and economic crisis, but the situation in the region is growing much more unstable than before. And this is also based upon immoral policies carried out by Western regimes, their alliance with the Saudi and Qatari regimes who are promoting Wahhabi extremism across the board. We now see the blowback in Algeria. And there really is no one to blame for these atrocities and these terrorist attacks more than the United States and the Europeans themselves, because they, by destroying the Libyan infrastructure, by attacking the country, by allowing Qataris and Saudis to fund extremists, they've allowed this to spread into Mali, to Algeria, the whole north of Africa, and of course Syria and beyond. Alongside the whole Mediterranean, we have increased instability. So the United States really is not in the greatest possible position to intimidate Iran, and the Iranians know that they are well within their rights as an independent country. So it is basically for the United States to rethink its policy towards Iran. Instead of trying to hurt ordinary Iranians to try to make children die because of a lack of medicine, and instead of bombing country after country, the United States has to really rethink what the United States policy in the region is. And if it begins to behave more reasonably, then a solution is possible. But as long as the United States continues to behave as an irrational and immoral actor, then I think there will be no solution.
Stuart Stogel, I want you to hold your thoughts in terms of a reaction to Professor Marandi while I address this next question to Nader Bagherzadeh, because Nader Bagherzadeh, this was picked up by many of the Western agencies about Iran's leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's fatwa prohibiting the government of Iran from possession or use of nuclear weapons. Nothing new, but it seems like it was highlighted when it was said again this past week. Why do you think that was?
With regard to that statement?
Yes.
I think it's trying to emphasize that the position of the leadership is that Iran is not after the nuclear bomb. I think that's my impression. And it basically supports the intelligence community's past NIE reports that we all know about, that even at 2003, this has been stopped, and there is no record of additional work in this area. So I think the background is being set up that the peaceful nature of Iranian nuclear activity could be presentable to the world as long as the agency is involved. I think this is a good point to be reminded of, and also the people that are working in the field already know that. It's just it's for the probably attention of the public. But I think in general, I see a more positive, nuanced approach. I know in the past it's been very negative. I mean, these sanctions are impacting ordinary Iranian people. We know that. I think it was mentioned in this interview as well. But we cannot find a better position than we are right now, because the team members want to solve this issue diplomatically and protect Iran's interests. I think they want. If their approach is the same as before, and I agree, that would be a colossal mistake. Let's hope that's not the case, because the results have been completely different than the expectations. So if there's a new thinking, with understanding that all these other new rules and regulations by the agency will be enforced in a way that is not revealing the secrets of Iran's military infrastructure, then maybe there is a way forward. The proposal has to include some level of enrichment for Iran. I think they should understand that issue is basically is not negotiable. I think Dr. Soltania mentioned it again in his interview, if I'm not mistaken. So the direction is going very well, and the statement about the leadership saying that they're not after the bomb is also supporting that. So the pieces are moving in the right direction, I think. And we have to be hopeful. There's no other way around this, because the option of applying military strikes is not a good option.
Very well. And Stuart Stogel, if you remember what Professor Marandi said, is the U.S. in the footing in a stronger position in terms of bullying itself and its agenda on Iran regarding its nuclear file? What do you think?
Well, to be honest with you, I mean, I just do not see any incentive for the Americans to ease up on the pressure on Iran. As I said, it's a big election year in Iran, and the Americans want to influence the Iranian vote, whether we like it or whether it's proper or not. It's a fact of life. So I see nothing on the American table that's going to prevent them from not increasing pressure. And there are other ways they can increase pressure on Iran that they have not yet used, short of an actual military operation. And let's be honest, the Israelis are going to have an election in about 2 weeks. I think we'll get a very clear indication as to where we go in 2013 in about a month. I think after the next round of IAEA talks in Tehran, we'll get a clearer indication as to where the West is heading with Tehran this year.
And Professor Marandi, where is that direction? Looking at the talks with IAEA February 12th, and then after that, we assume there's going to be the P5+1 discussions also to be held. Well, 30 seconds.
Very quickly, the Iranian elections really will change nothing, because there's a consensus among the politicians in Iran of various political backgrounds that the nuclear program is Iran's right, and they'll pursue it. And public opinion, according to polls, is very much behind the program. The United States, if it tries to put more pressure on Iran, obviously there will be pushback from Iran, and as American fortunes in the region decline, it's really not in the interest of the United States to continue with these policies.
I'm sorry, I got to jump in. We're fresh out of time. I do apologize. Professor at the University of Tehran there, Mohammad Marandi, from Newsmax magazine, Stuart Stogel, and we have Professor at the University of California, Nader Bagherzadeh. Thank you very much for watching another edition of the News Analysis from Mikova Tahvai and the entire team from the capital, Tehran. It's goodbye.